and wants to fight fire with fire.
You're listening to The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with your host, Ray Koch.
Hello and welcome back to The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with me, your host, Ray Koch. Now, last time on the show, we talked about a lot of different fights. Hope you got to check some of them out. This week, we're actually just going to be talking about one fight in particular. I think you'll understand why, though. Out of Omaha, Terence Crawford, he's got a big fight coming up against Amir. That takes place April 20th in New York City at Madison Square Garden. That's going to be the focus of the day's show. I'll give some analysis, some predictions, talk about each fighter a little bit. But before we get into that fight, I hope you guys got the chance 2 weeks ago to see the Errol Spence Jr. versus Mikey Garcia fight. If you didn't, we talked about it on my first podcast. You can go back and give it a listen. I broke down a little bit about each fighters and the way I thought the fight would go. I gave two predictions for that. I said, one, it'll be a unanimous decision that Errol Spence wins, or two, it'll be Errol Spence win by knockout late. It turned out that the first one was actually correct. Spence outboxed Garcia all night, proved to be the bigger man, like I said, and really just outworked him. Wasn't really a close fight. Errol Spence took it by unanimous decision, proving that Mikey Garcia was, just as talented, but too small to be fighting that big a fighter, and something that we already knew. But it wasn't a real impressive showing by Spence. He boxed well, like I said, but when you're fighting those fights where people expect you to win and you're a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, the public really expects you to win in fashion, not just win. And he didn't knock him out, didn't knock him down. But he won convincingly. Nobody thought he lost, but it doesn't hurt him in the pound for pound rankings per se. But I think people were expecting more. Spence is a guy who fights it. The fight was at 147. Spence fights at 147, but he's a big dude, even for 147. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, but eventually he will go up to fight at 154 because he's that size of a fighter. Whereas Mikey Garcia, even though he was fighting at 147, that was his first fight at 147, and he's usually 135, 140 pounder. So fighting a guy that was clearly out of his weight class, you expected him to be able to show that power and knock him down or knock him out. And while he did show his power in some shots that hurt Mikey Garcia, he never really had him close to being knocked down or hit any crazy shots that Garcia just had a crazy good chin on. So that type of fight, when you see the fighter that was expected to win, but it be what most fans would call a boring fight, doesn't necessarily bode well for the fighter who is favored, which is Errol Spence. So we'll see where he comes back with that, because obviously, which is why I'm leading into that before the Crawford fight, is those two want to fight each other. Everyone wants to see that fight. They're not big fans of each other. Spence always talks down on Crawford and says that, he doesn't have the resume to fight him, even though he's 34-0. That's, Spence's opinion. But him showing that and him not being able to do what he says Crawford should do makes me want to see that fight more, and I think puts a little more pressure on Spence to make that fight happen. Now, that all hinges on this fight coming up, though. Bud Crawford and Amir Khan. Now, I'll give you background on both these fighters, but obviously Terence Crawford from Omaha, he's 34-0. He's never lost, no draws. Great amateur background. Deep amateur background. He had a lot of amateur fights, and for some casual fans out there that don't really understand how amateur works, the more amateur fights you have and the more successful you are before turning pro, kind of the smarter fighter you're going to be, and the more you're going to see in the ring. You might have better defense, better basic defense, and that muscle memory kind of takes over when you've been doing it for so long. Now, the pressure for amateur fighters to turn pro is big, because that's where the money is. You're not making money when you're an amateur. When you're a professional, obviously you're making money. But we see a lot of fighters that turn pro too early, and then their careers aren't as good as they could have been, because amateurs is kind of like the minor leagues in in baseball, but it doesn't work the same because, there's a obvious skill level difference there. But in the amateurs for boxing, the more fights you have, the more things you're going to see. And so we've seen a lot of different people. Floyd Mayweather had one. Triple G had a really good amateur record, and obviously Lomachenko, who was 396-1 in his amateur career, which is just an outstanding amateur career before turning pro. Almost 400 fights before he turned pro. We can see where him and Terence Crawford are 1 and 2 in either order in the pound for pound list. So you can see that amateur background helps a lot. But so Crawford had that, but he's also had some big fights recently. Like I said, he's 34-0. He has 25 knockouts. He does have knockouts in 7 of his last 8 fights, which is, a good record for a guy who's fighting, top tier talent like that. He stopped everyone in his last 5 fights. His last guy he didn't stop was Victor Postel, which was a guy that, many people predicted that would beat Terence Crawford. And he had a similar performance to Spence and Garcia in a different context because they were the same weight, and a lot of people thought Postel would win. But Crawford won that fight convincingly, and it helped his resume rather than hurt it. Everyone since he's knocked out in order. It's John Molina Jr., knocked him out in Omaha in 2016, Felix Diaz, and then most notably Julius Ndongo, which was an undefeated fighter from Africa who he fought in Lincoln and knocked him out in the 3rd round with a brutal body shot. A lot of people thought Ndongo was going to win that fight because he was a lot longer. He was also undefeated and had some pretty good knockout highlight reel finishes. But Crawford won that fight in 3 rounds. It was convincing, and I can't say that put Terence Crawford on the map. But for those who didn't have Terence Crawford on their map of top pound for pound fighters, that win over Ndongo in the fashion that he did it, the way he did it, so easily, so quickly for a guy that was really respected. If you didn't have Terence Crawford on the map before that, you put him there after that Ndongo fight. But then he backs it up with Jeff Horn, who beat Manny Pacquiao, so everyone's high on Jeff Horn, and he did the same thing. He worked him throughout the course of 8-9 rounds and finished him in brutal fashion. Just was toying with him at the end. It was funny to watch, but I'm not a big Jeff Horn fan since he beat Manny Pacquiao, and I have I grew up watching Manny Pacquiao. I like him and didn't really think Pacquiao lost that fight against Horn. So you could say part of me was saying that I was looking forward to Horn getting his face rearranged by Crawford's gloves, and that's exactly what happened. So he knocked him out. Then he knocked out Jose Benavidez Jr., which was another undefeated fighter out of Mexico. That was his last fight, and that was actually in Omaha. I had the chance to cover that and see all the festivities there, which was a big build-up because there was a lot of animosity between those two, and Crawford finished him in the 12th round after outboxing him all night. It kind of showed that, the narrative on Crawford now, and rightfully so, is that they call in a boxing sense, they call him a killer. He has that killer mentality. He doesn't just want to beat you. He's not satisfied with winning by decision or just outboxing you all night. He wants to finish you, and that's what we saw with Benavidez, where Crawford had the fight won. A lot of those times you'll see in the later rounds, especially in the 12th round when both fighters are tired, the one that's winning will just kind of take a step back and box smart defensively, not throwing a lot of punches so he doesn't leave himself open to a chance where he can get tagged. But that's not what we saw from Bud Crawford. He really went after Benavidez, hit him with a brutal left uppercut that folded his leg, knocked him down. He did get up, and there was only 15 seconds left in the fight. Most fighters would have just been satisfied with that, knocked him down, and played it safe for the last 15. But right when the referee said they were good to go after Benavidez got up, Crawford rushed to him, started throwing a bunch of hooks and mixing up head shot, body shot, mixing it up. And Benavidez was just in basic guard, just trying to hold on for dear life. And Crawford hit him with a body shot and then with a brutal right hook and another left hook, and that hit him on the temple and knocked him out, and the referee stopped the fight. So That fight helped Crawford, obviously, because he got the finish, but Benavidez was respected as well. And, it continued to show that as Crawford goes up in weight, and as he's fought at 147 now, 3 times, that he has that knockout power that people were questioning him with. Everyone knows he's a great boxer. Everyone knows he can switch it up, southpaw, orthodox. He switches stances better than anyone since the great Marvin Hagler did it in the mid 80s up at the middleweight division. But so he has so much in his arsenal, but people, I mean, he is a smaller 147 pounder. People thought him moving up in weight, we might see some of his knockout power not be as evident. There were those big guys, and he would have to rely on outboxing them. But what we've seen is that he's doing both. He's outboxing guys, and he's also knocking them out. So that just improves his resume. And like I said, this is all to get the 147-pound kings, which I would call Errol Spence and Bud Crawford, to fight each other, which Crawford has said he wants. Spence has said that he would do it, but he doesn't think Crawford stands a chance, blah, blah, blah. So leading up to that, now we have Amir Khan. Now, this fight got announced a couple months ago. Amir Khan's an interesting fighter, very interesting fighter. And for those who follow boxing, they've heard of Khan. For those that don't, I'm going to try to paint you a picture of who Amir Khan is in the best sense I can. And the best way I think I can do that, especially for casual or non-boxing fans, is to compare him to someone else. And so everyone remembers when Patrick Mahomes, former quarterback at Texas Tech, got drafted by the Chiefs and was their starter. Everyone remembers when you're watching Patrick Mahomes, you're saying to yourself, something's different about that guy. He does stuff that we've never seen, whether it's throwing from a different arm angle, the throws he can make, how strong his arm is. He just did some things that were electrifying and glorifying to the eye and just had that wow factor. Well, when Khan turned pro in 2005, that was Amir Khan. Amir Khan was Patrick Mahomes because Khan has the fastest hands in boxing, even though he's a little older now, 14 years after he debuted. He's getting up there in age, but he still probably has the fastest hands in boxing. And it was something where it was just unparalleled to anyone we've ever seen. His hands were so quick, and he was a big prospect, and everyone was like, this guy has a chance to really be not just great, but world class, like generational great. And he looked like that way through his first 10, 15 fights till he came across this guy named Bradis Prescott. Fought him in Manchester, wasn't supposed to be a really big fight. And we saw, they say even Achilles had a weakness. We saw Khan's weakness. And that was what everyone knows him as. Now they call him the glass chin. He got knocked out by Prescott on a shot where his legs just folded, his balance was off, and he was done. So from that fight on, we've seen Khan get knocked out 3 other times, and every time it's that same thing where his chin just fails him. He has all the talent in the world and the quickest hands and great offense, and he's a fun fighter to watch because he attacks, and it's so fun to watch his hands just fly. You can't even see the punches going, but his chin fails him, and we've seen that time and time again. He's fought some big names, however, though. Danny Garcia, who's another 147-pound guy, who Crawford would also love to fight, and I mentioned that fight in my last podcast as well. He got knocked out by Danny Garcia in similar fashion, where he was outboxing him all night. His chin let him down, and he got caught with a hook and got knocked out. Same thing happened against Canelo Alvarez, which, if you listen to my last podcast, I mentioned, that's one of the greatest fighters we've had in our generation, and a guy that just keeps on winning and winning. And that was an interesting fight because that was the biggest fight of Khan's career, no doubt. And for Canelo, it was a big fight as well. That fight was in Vegas, and the narrative on Amir Khan is, though he gets knocked out, he's never been outboxed, and that was the one fight where people really expected Canelo to outbox Khan. And early in the fight, it was all Khan. Khan was tagging him, getting the better of their exchanges, landing cleaner, harder punches. And then towards round 6 or 7, it started changing. Canelo got some momentum to where in rounds 8 or 9, 10, it was a really tight fight, really close, hard to score. Most people had it near a draw or leaning one way, and then Canelo knocked him out with a knockout of the year. And we saw Khan's chin fold once again. Now, Khan hasn't had a big fight since then, a mega fight, so to say, since then. He's fought 2 other times and knocked a guy out and then got a unanimous decision. So this is Khan's big fight again with Bud Crawford now, and it's an interesting fight. I'm really excited that it's happening. But it's one where we're going to see, does history repeat itself? And also where we're going to learn a lot about how much Khan has left in the tank versus how much Crawford can go up and still be knocking people out, or which way that he wins. I would say Crawford is the heavy favorite in the fight. I don't think that it would be disputed. But one of the most interesting things is that, as I've said before, Crawford's fighting at 147 pounds, but naturally his body style, he's a 140-pound guy. And Khan has spent the majority of his career fighting at 147, but also 154. So he's almost 2 weight classes bigger than Terence Crawford is naturally. Now, they'll fight at 147, but as I've stated before, the weigh-ins, they'll have to weigh 147. The next day, Crawford might weigh 150, where Khan's going to weigh closer to 160. So he is going to be a much bigger guy. And in the press conferences we've seen, in the interviews they've done, we have seen, there's a little height difference, but mainly it's that shoulder and the arms. Khan's a much larger, more mass, has more mass than Crawford does. So that's where this fight gets really interesting. Because if Terence Crawford knocks Khan out, there will be a loud number of people screaming for Crawford and Spence to happen. And since Spence didn't look too good in his last fight, and he kind of is the guy that makes the calls at this point, and if Crawford looks really good in this fight, then it puts them more on an even level to where there's more pressure on Spence to take that fight. But for Crawford to be able to knock out Khan, history would tell you that he's going to have to weather through the first 4 or 5 rounds of Khan I wouldn't say outboxing him, but being really tough to outbox. And Crawford's going to see hand speed that he's never seen before in the first 4 or 5 rounds. And then for him to knock him out, it would mean that he would have to catch him in those middle to late rounds like most people did and knock him out. But for that to happen, I mean, that's a big if, because Crawford's a smaller guy than Khan's been knocked out by before. And being a smaller guy, it's just going to be tough for him to create that power to knock out a guy that, is going to be 154 pounds naturally. So that's where the big if comes in. Now, if Khan beats Crawford, then obviously Crawford takes a huge step down. That'd be devastating for his career. But it would put Khan back on the map, and then Khan would probably fight one of those guys. But it wouldn't be the same as him fighting Errol Spence, because Spence is a bigger guy, so he'd have a better chance of knocking him out. How I see this fight going, prediction-wise, is the first 4 or 5 rounds. I think you're going to see Khan hang around with Crawford. I think they'll be pretty even. Crawford usually takes it slow, starts slow. I think that a lot of people will have Khan winning the first 4 or 5 rounds, and then you'll start to see the technician and Terence Crawford take over. I think rounds, 5 through 10, if it makes it that far, Crawford's going to start to figure him out, wear him down. Now, where I see the fight getting interesting is rounds 10, 11, and 12. If Crawford can tag him, I think he has the power to knock him out, but it's a big if. And if he wins by decision, people won't be as satisfied with that, because what they've seen Khan fold before. They've seen his chin get hit and his legs fold and get knocked out. So that's what people are expecting. if it doesn't happen, the likelihood of Crawford Spence happening for me goes down even more. But I do believe Terence Crawford has the power to knock Khan out, and I do believe he will. I believe he'll stop him late and finish the fight. Either way, this is going to be a great fight, a can't-miss fight, and I hope you all tune in to watch it. Both fighters were recently on ESPN with Max Kellerman, who's a famous boxing analyst on HBO and now with ESPN. They sat down with him and kind of both gave in their thoughts. We'll show you a clip here of what both of them said had to say about each other. Here you go.
Well, he's considered one of the best welterweights out there. He's took a couple of losses, but as you know, all the other top welterweights have fight dates. We would have liked to have another top welterweight lined up, but it didn't happen, so we got to go to the next best opponent.
Well, first of all, you know, when the opportunity come to me, I was like, yeah, I would love this fight. I mean, Terence is up there being one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world and having a world title as well. So this is just a massive opportunity for me to turn down.
So like I said, this fight takes place April 20th in New York at Madison Square Garden. It's a can't-miss fight. I hope you guys all tune in to watch it, if for no other reason than to support an Omaha athlete and one of the best fighters in the world, and Terence Crawford. And feel free to send me your predictions. Like I said, I'm predicting a late-round knockout by Crawford, but I also have him weathering the storm or losing a couple rounds early to Khan while he adjusts to his hand speed and how fast he is. But I think Crawford is the type of class of fighter where he can overcome that and that he has the power to knock him out and expose that chin that we all know that is a liability of Khan's. So make sure you tune into the fight. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with me. And like I said, I hope you guys enjoy the fight. Thank you.
My style is impetuous, my defense is impregnable, and I'm just ferocious. I want your heart, I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
Thanks for listening to The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with Ray Koch.